Just 1 week ago, Russia ran tactical nuclear drills, moving their nukes into firing positions near Ukraine. A few days later, they had their over-the-horizon nuclear radars destroyed. These are for the sole purpose, or primary purpose, of detecting intercontinental ballistic missiles, strategic, all-out nuclear warfare. Now, just today, the first deputy director of Russia's FSB, their Federal Security Service, has come out and accused the United States and its vassals, also known as NATO, of preparing to do nuclear strikes on their territory. Now, while these accusations are far more arcane than the Russians themselves practicing tactical nuclear drills, we have a very similar situation unfolding as to what we did in early 2022, where you had both sides accusing the other of about to make a move, and then, of course, one side made a move. The Russians to this day insist that they were just preempting an attack that was coming from Ukraine into the Donbass, while the majority of the world views it as Russia invaded Ukraine in an unprovoked manner. Regardless, the most important thing to consider here is that as we speak, we have now three main points of vertical escalation in the past week alone. Movement of tactical nukes into firing positions, the targeting of Russia's nuclear radars by US and its vassal states and its non-vassal states like Ukraine, or its vassals by some other name than NATO. And now you have these accusations being made that the Russians are aware that NATO is planning to do nuclear strikes on its territory. Now, in the last 24 hours, something remarkable has happened. All of a sudden, you have all of these European leaders, including many within the US government, calling for a lifting of the moratorium on Ukraine using their longer range weapon systems that they've been given, or medium range, I guess they'd be considered, to target deep inside Russia and allow them to neutralize the sites that the Russians are using to wage war against them. Many of these sites inside Russia are a dual purpose. So not only are they for the purpose of waging war against Ukraine, but they're also for the purpose of strategic warfare. These are home to strategic bombers, proximate to places where nuclear weapons are stored, or nuclear radars, or some aspect of their nuclear triad, which is dependent on critical infrastructure. You take out a nation's critical infrastructure and they cannot fire the nuclear weapons. That's pretty much the same thing as taking out their nuclear weapons, because of course it puts them in a very vulnerable situation. Now today, you have pretty much everybody, with the exception of, I think, Italy and Olaf Scholz, who's kind of waffling on the issue and pretending that he's not in support of this, when really he and the United States are. They're just the biggest powerhouses amongst them, so they have to be a bit more tight-lipped. It's kind of like if you run a company, you're never going to see the owner going out and giving the customer the bad news. That's the job of the bitch, the middle management or the manager. They have to go out, give people the bad news. And that's exactly what's happening here, as you have the UK, Sweden, France, Finland, Poland, and all the Baltic states basically not only calling for the deployment of instructors. What bullshit. If you think that they're just going there to instruct, I mean, there's already 1,000 French troops in Ukraine. That's pretty much, it's unofficial, but you can rest assured there's a hell of a lot of smoke. There's guaranteed to be a fire of some magnitude. You have all of them calling for the use of weapons to target deep inside Russia in unison, including Jens Stoltenberg and Joseph Borrell, the head of the EU. In addition to that, you have this U.S. policy that appears at first glance to be against the idea of Ukraine using weapons against Russia. But when you really listen to the wording of spokesperson Matthew Miller, here is what he said on the topic of Ukraine being permitted to use U.S. weapon systems inside of Russia to target Russia's nuclear facilities, essentially, because you know that's what they're going to do, because they're trying to provoke a response. I'll get to that in just a moment. He said that our policy is that we do not encourage or allow attacks beyond Ukrainian borders. Notice what he said. Our policy is that we do not encourage or allow attacks beyond Ukrainian borders. Now, number one, Ukrainians consider Crimea to be a part of their country. That's not really the issue here. I think Russia is already resigned to the fact that Crimea is going to be a target, and clearly it's a red line that's been overstepped without things going nuclear. They're talking, of course, about Russia proper, the Russia that is undeniably Russian, outside of Crimea and the Donbass. But the wording here is that we do not encourage, okay? We do not encourage attacks. Now, they do say allow attacks, but that's quite secondary. Furthermore, all of these attacks that are being leveraged inside of Russia are using U.S. reconnaissance. They are using, and this is what Vladimir Putin said outright today. He explicitly stated this in an Uzbekistan, I think it was Uzbekistan press conference, that the systems that are being used to coordinate all of these attacks inside their territory are NATO-based, are the United States. So when they say that they don't encourage, that doesn't mean that they're not continuing to provide Ukraine and that there's any punitive action taking place. It just means that they're not encouraging it. And they can say, well, we don't allow it either. But of course they have to say that, right? Because what they're trying to do now is position it so that the vassal states are taking the heat, so that if this thing goes nuclear, it remains at the tactical level. What we need right now, think of what a tactical nuclear detonation would be like for the military-industrial complex. The detonation of a tactical nuke, if you can provoke the Russians into doing it, that's like what bird flu is to all of those medicinal companies who just can't wait to start needling people again. That would be the equivalent. You cannot tell me that there's not somebody just in a corner somewhere going like this, just waiting for the use of a tactical nuke to be deployed. Now, the question is, why would NATO ever want this? Why would NATO want the Russians to use a low-yield, theater-based tactical nuclear weapon? And why are they actively allowing, and they're not discouraging Ukraine from targeting these nuclear radars? They are not slapping their hands at all. There has been no restrictions. I mean, you could say that there's restrictions, but saying there is, and then allowing them to do this and empowering them and enabling them to do these attacks is another story altogether. So they're trying to provoke the Russians into using a tactical nuke. Now you have a situation where the Russians are starting to throw out their own propaganda. Even though it's not propaganda, there's probably a lot of truth to it, that NATO is indeed training to target them with nuclear weapons as well. I mean, this is all part and parcel of Steadfast Defender and all the other strategic exercises and the B-52s that are flying around Kaliningrad on a regular basis and all the recon planes in the Black Sea. They're all, you could construe them as collectively preparing for a strategic battle with the Russians. And then, of course, you have the rhetoric about troops being sent in, ratcheting up day after day. Now that we're normalized to it, you have the French legions in there already. People are normalized to it. People are normalized to sending instructors. It's the age-old, as it's called, the camel sticking its nose in the tent, and then the full body gets in there eventually, because once you let the nose in, once, curiosity killed the cat, choose your metaphor, mission creep, they're going to go all the way. And so Russia's in a certain predicament right now, because if the Russians believe that they are trying to be provoked to use tactical nuclear weapons, then if they do that, it's not going to elicit the response they want. What it's going to do, meaning that it's not going to slow the progress of NATO's escalation. What it's going to do is, in fact, encourage more escalation. It is going to give the United States and its vassals all the excuse they need to mobilize. You remember when Rishi Sunak floated the idea of conscription and how that's going to be a part of his platform, and have you seen this progressive ramping up, this public relations campaign about how you need to get prepared in pretty much all countries, one by one, almost sequentially, since the beginning of the year, talking about prepping and having bug-out bags and flashlights on batteries, and the list goes on. Well, what you need to really push people over the edge into a decoupled war economy is some kind of event like that. But you don't want to be the one to initiate it. You want to provoke the Russians into doing it. So the Russians are in a predicament now where if they use a tactical nuke, which may seemingly be their only real choice, but if that's what NATO wants, then it's not going to work. So what do they do then? Do they use a bigger nuclear weapon? Do they go strategic right from the start? Or do they do some other hybrid chess move where they attack NATO asymmetrically, perhaps via another proxy? Maybe the Russians open up another front somewhere, or they attack some undersea cables, or they sabotage more facilities, or they do a massive cyber attack against the EU and NATO that Jens Stoltenberg has already said would in fact invoke Article 5. So they're already setting the preconditions for the invocation of Article 5 that aren't necessarily a direct kinetic attack. So while all this is happening, you have Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister of the UK, largely a figurehead, I do believe, because who knows who calls the real shots in that country. I don't know a whole lot about UK politics. There are some rumors as to why exactly Sunak is calling an election in the next 2 months. I'll get right to the point. I think it's because they know that the shit's going to go down, and that this platform he's putting out there as being the conscription military type prime minister, there's two ways of looking at this. Either they're trying to throw the election and he doesn't want to be the leader anymore, and he is, because he knows that a big war is coming and he's not about that. And he knows that things are just about to get really, really crappy, and he's a young guy, so maybe he'll come back later on. Or it's because they know that within this time period of the next 2 months, something really bad is about to happen. And all things point towards that. Remember, within the span of a week, we have tactical nuclear weapons being moved into firing positions on the border with Ukraine. Not right on the border, but close. You have the taking out of nuclear radars. Those two things in and of themselves would have been headlines that should have garnered millions of views to anybody who put that in a title of a video 2 years ago. I mean, if I cannot imagine what the response would be, but because we've been so systematically desensitized to all this, people just think, oh, more nuclear stuff on the border. This is deadly serious. We're so close, and it seems like one of these elusive things. The closer you get, the further away. But I don't know how many more steps are in between here and there. The question is, are the Russians going to take the bait? Because of course, if you know that your enemy is trying to provoke you into doing something, doing it is not the smart move. Even if you might have some short to medium term successes in scaring some countries. But if the Russians know this, then the problem is that they're going to have to react in a way that NATO is not expecting. And that could take many forms. Maybe they're going to do a conventional strike against some NATO country to call NATO's bluff. Because remember, we don't want nuclear war either. I mean, I think some elements of the MIC, they want a limited tactical nuclear war. But all of these people living their lavish lifestyles with their millions and billions of dollars in the bank, they know that goes poof, up in smoke when they drop those nukes. So sooner or later, if Russia really did want to push back and play the bluff game, they could. They could just attack a NATO base inside Poland, where all of the logistics hub for Ukrainian armaments is coming from. They could just do that, and I think that would almost catch NATO off guard more so than a nuclear strike. Now, would they both likely have the same degree of response? Possibly, but NATO's in a predicament then, right? Because Russia might provide a valid argument from an international point of view as to why they targeted Poland. Because of course, I mean, they could have done this long ago, arguably. They could have said that this is where the weapons are coming from. Ergo, it only makes sense that that's where we target. But there's this thing called Article 5, which if you've been watching the channel for a while, you know that this is not a binding resolution, in that, sure, all countries are in theory supposed to come to the aid of the impacted country, but in what capacity? This doesn't necessarily mean that they're all going to start nuking Russia, because they know if they open that can of worms, it's game over. So what we're being pushed into here is Russia being put in a situation where now they have to make a strategic move, because NATO, I think, is expecting a tactical move. They're expecting for the Russians to use a tactical nuclear weapon. And I think that's what they're hoping for. Because again, the use of a tactical nuke, could you imagine the headlines? Could you imagine the visual, just that small mushroom cloud on the mainstream headlines? And that is going to be a black swan event that they're going to be able to milk for decades. They only need one. And I don't even think they're necessarily going to respond, although they claim they're not going to respond with tactical nukes. But from the Russian point of view, you have to presume that they in fact are ready to go to nuclear war. Now the question is what is the level of autonomy of Ukraine in targeting Russian nuclear radars? Is this just Ukraine acting independently in order to provoke a Russian response? And on the back channels between the United States and Russia, is the United States telling Russia, look, this is out of our control. They're doing this. We're advising them not to. Regardless, the one who you're going to hold accountable is the owner of the company. At the end of the day, the guy who's providing Ukraine the weapons and the reconnaissance and all the technology and even the manpower to a certain extent, that's who you're going to go after. So we are really reaching a point where I think that this gambit that NATO and Ukraine are embarking on by trying to provoke the Russians into using tactical nukes, I think it is going to elicit an even greater response, in that Russia is either going to have to do something massive that far exceeds and catches them off guard, or maybe, because a lot of this stuff, you know, where we've expected there to be 4D chess moves in this war, we're just like getting what appears to be checkers. You know, the Ukrainians announcing that they're going to be doing this counteroffensive for months and months and months, and then just doing it exactly how they said they were going to do it. And a lot of us are scratching our heads saying, why would you telegraph that punch? I mean, it was just like, you know, you could see it coming in slow motion, Matrix style, for months, and then they did exactly what they said. And what was the point of that, right? And then even with the Russians, the same thing. It seems like, you know, it's very one-dimensional in terms of how they're waging this war. So if that's the case, then Russia is just going to fire off a tactical nuke, and then we're just going to keep running up the escalation ladder in that respect. What do you guys think about all this? Now, let's just go over some of the other details, okay? Some of the other points worth noting, the data points worth noting, and I'm going to expatiate about 4 pages of notes here because this is all important stuff, just to factor into what I just told you, okay? Now, Poland is saying that they won't rule out troops in Ukraine. We're starting to see this goalpost being moved constantly. Now, it turns out that today, in fact, we do have confirmation that there are 1,000 French mercenaries, and I think I talked about this weeks ago, but it becomes more official by the day. According to a colonel in the Luhansk People's Republic, Vitaly Kiselev, He is saying that there are 1,000 French mercenaries and legionnaires already just in the Donbass. Okay, that's fighting on the front lines. Today, we already have information of more than 1,000 French mercenaries and are already in the territory of the Donbass. Now, on the other side, you have a Ukrainian general saying that Russia is preparing 400,000 troops. Okay, that's 14 divisions and 16 brigades for a major military maneuver, likely somewhere in the northern part of the conflict, but we just don't know. Could be Odessa, could be, it's very difficult to say. But so that's what's going on the ground. There hasn't been a whole lot of movement in this Kharkov direction. We have Putin saying in this speech that he gave today, where he did look noticeably nervous. It looked like he was trying to play it cool and he was trying to keep his poker face on, but I sensed some nervousness. For starters, he had his hand in his pocket, which is, I think that's uncommon for Vladimir Putin. I study his body language a lot, and typically, if he's confident, his hands are out in the open. But today it was a little bit different. He had that grin on his face, that look as though, you know, everything's going to be fine and I have a plan. But there was just a little bit of background anxiety, but he was trying to mollify the population and appease people's concerns that this thing is about to go nuclear, which any sane thinking person would have to think at this point in time. Here's what he said to NATO. They should be aware of what they're playing with. The constant escalation of the conflict, including strikes on peaceful city quarters, will lead to serious consequences. This, as a rule, a state with a small territory and a very dense population, should keep this factor in mind before talking about launching strikes deep into Russian territory. So, of course, he's referring to really any European country. There are some larger European countries, but you could talk about the UK, you could talk about the Baltic states, different parts of the Scandinavian countries where population centers are fairly concentrated. So he's speaking to them. Now, he also said in that speech that NATO is the one who's coordinating strikes against Russia. So not blaming Ukraine, okay? He's blaming the United States. When the United States is trying to sit this one out and they're trying to, you know, pretend like the DOD said today that, well, we don't encourage, right? But at the same time, the United States is enabling Ukraine to use their satellites, their GPS, their reconnaissance planes to target deep inside Russia. And Putin knows that. So he's speaking to the real people. And it should be noted that Putin no longer thinks Zelensky is a legitimate leader. So remember when I tossed this guy a few months ago? Well, as always, we predict the future on this channel. Who else is going next? So this guy, he's calling an election. Now they're saying, before I go further, there we go. Okay, so they're saying it's because that he wants to, I think I already went over this, I don't want to beleaguer the point, but I think it's because he knows that shit's about to hit the fan. So either he's going to use that towards the end of his campaign, or maybe he just wants to call it quits because he doesn't want to be burdened with being the World War III president, and that might be a smart thing. Anyways, back to Zelensky being no longer the legitimate leader according to Vladimir Putin. So every time he's addressing Ukraine now, he's not addressing, Zelensky. He's maybe addressing their parliament, but he's really addressing NATO. So from this point forward, Zelensky's got a hit on his head, and that is something we could see. And I really think now the climate is ripe for Zelensky to potentially take a step down. And I don't think there would be a lot of people, even in the West, whoever is still left in that staunch pro-Ukrainian crowd, I don't even think they would make a big deal out of it. And in fact, this might be the only off-ramp there is just to exchange the face of the player, the main player. Now, according to Konstantin Gavrilov, head of Russia's delegation to the Vienna talks on military security, he is saying that the decision has already been made for NATO to send troops. As I just told you, according to commanders on the front lines, they're already fighting troops. And I mean, and that's true on the Russian side as well. The Russians have mercenaries. This is becoming a real world war. Lavrov, a couple weeks ago, as we talked about on the channel, already insists that NATO has made the decision to go to war with Russia. We know the war is coming. That's why the United States is making deals with Canadian mining companies today worth billions of dollars to start to acquire a lot of our resources up here, because they know what's coming. The decoupling with China is coming. Anyways, we'll get to that in just a moment. We regard the discussions getting more active about NATO boots on Ukrainian black soil as a futile attempt to put pressure on Russia to drag our state into an arms race. And this is something that it's very important for people to recognize as well. Part of the reason why the 70s and 80s sucked is because the Cold War basically sucked the lifeblood out of the economy and moved it into the military-industrial complex. And unless you were in that industry, you know, with the exception of some tech bubbles in the 80s, you probably weren't very prosperous. It was just a general, not necessarily a prosperous, booming time. It's because there was no peace dividend. When that peace dividend goes away, which it is, we're in the process of that going away, and what they're going to try to do is bankrupt the Russians first. That's the goal ultimately. But of course, Russia's economy has proven to be very resilient. That's when it's going to start really having noticeable effects on the entirety of the economy, not just on the price of food, which is sky high, housing and all of these things, but just basically across the board inflation. In his opinion, the discussion about the potential deployment of national contingents from NATO countries to Ukraine is nothing but a bluff, according to this particular delegation. So he doesn't actually think that NATO is going to put troops on the ground. We know that troops are already on the ground, but he's saying that a lot of this is just bluffing, okay? But the question is, if it's all bluffing, who bluffs last? Because of course, if Russia eventually Russia's going to be put in a position very soon where their only option is to do something extraordinarily just unexpected. And if that is an attack on a NATO base, which it has to be in some capacity, I do believe, in order it to invoke the response that they're looking for, then that's when we know whether or not we're bluffing or not. And of course, because our leaders got to look the part, they're probably not going to just go gently. They're going to escalate even more. Perhaps we're going to see a situation, though, and we did see with the situation in Iran, that when they need to, they'll bite their tongue. And the only reason why they didn't go all in on Iran is because, number one, it's an election season. They want to keep the people happy, and they know if the price of oil goes through the roof, then it's going to crash the global economy. And that's as simple as that. They're keeping that. They're going there. They just have to find the right time in order to do that. And this is why the United States today is trying to tone down the aggressive rhetoric towards Iran's nuclear program. But I guarantee you that they're getting ready to play that card. They're just not ready yet. This is why Biden released a million barrels of gasoline from the Strategic Oil Reserve, and he tweeted about that today, making it official. But something to think about here is that gasoline is even more important than oil, arguably, because of course you have to refine it, right? And so if you don't have the ability, like if war broke out, none of these refineries are going to be turning that oil into all the various different types of fuel. So that's going to be one of the biggest challenges. It's one thing to have the oil, but you got to get it into a fuel that you can readily use. Now, a lot of American military vehicles can probably run on this stuff. Probably not good for them, but in terms of longevity and maintenance, but that's something they're used to, I guess. But using up the strategic reserves of gasoline when we're so close to the precipice doesn't seem like a good idea if it's just to keep people happy and to try to bring the price of gasoline. And really, I mean, that's not a lot of gas. I mean, you think about, just do the math on that. Okay, 1 million barrels, I don't know how many gallons. That's maybe a couple tanks of gas for, a couple million people. And you're talking about a nation of probably hundreds of millions of people that drive vehicles. So is it really going to put a huge dent? Probably by a few percentage points. Nothing that I think is going to be very noticeable. There'll be a bit of a bull market or market bullwhip effect, I should say, which could probably backfire down the road. But all of these things are connected. So I talked about Sunak and why he's fast-tracking the election. Some of you probably already know the F-35B fighter jet crashed today in Albuquerque International, New Mexico. Who knows what that was all about? It's just, again, one of these things that you're going to see more of as we see more military maneuvers, more military training. You're going to see more military accidents. Was it a cyber attack? Who knows? Poland is now restricting movements of Russian diplomats. Poland is going to be restricting the movements of numerous Russian diplomats, and of course, Moscow has promised retaliation. According to the Poles, Polish officials say that we hope that the Russian Federation will treat this as a very serious warning, according to Polish Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski. And I believe that there's been numerous different embassies and consulates shut down, or consulates shut down inside Poland in the last year. Before we proceed further, let's talk about today's sponsor. Guess who it is? Us, CanadianPreparedness.com. I got in an argument with a good friend of mine the other day as to why I don't do sponsors on the channel. And part of the reason is it's always the case that the companies I love are too cheap to want to sponsor the channel because they know they have a good product. But the companies that are kind of, on the fence, they're the ones, and not all the time. There's a few, and usually the people who I've had as sponsors, like Peak Refuel, I've had to encourage them to sponsor the channel because I love their stuff so much, right? Or Freeze Dry Wholesale Foods. I love their stuff, so I have to go and encourage them. But usually they're reluctant because they know they have a good product. They're kind of like Elon Musk, they're like, why should I pay for advertising when I know I got a good product? So the argument I was having with this friend was about, I can't bring myself to promoting things that suck. I just feel it diminishes and cheapens the message on this channel, which is things are getting pretty crazy and you need to prepare. So the sponsor of the channel is CanadianPreparedness.com. As you can see, we're a Benchmade dealer, as well as probably a dealer of thousands of other types of products. But quick take on my EDC. Okay, these are things that I use dozens of times a day, and now even more so that I'm on the homestead. First up is the Benchmade Adamus knife. See if I can get you some focus there. So that's the Adamus. It's a bit more tactical, okay? Benchmade just makes wonderful knives. I'm not going to talk in depth about each of these. You guys have seen my reviews on some of this stuff, but if you want one knife to just do everything, it's a Benchmade. I'm not going to say which one in particular. I actually I'm guilty of carrying almost 3 at certain times. This is the bug out version. Okay, very sleek, slim, lightweight. Okay, nothing too crazy, very easy to open. It's not auto opening, but it's so quick to open, and it's quick to shut as well. And they come in a variety of different types, tanto, different types of steel, different types of handles, carbon fiber. This is a new addition to my kit. Now, I've messed around with tactical pens before, and I haven't really liked them because they tend to be too heavy, or I don't know, they're just too big and bulky, and I don't really use them that much. This one I make an exception for. This is one that was put out by Right in the Rain, which is the company who makes the waterproof notebooks and stuff like that. This thing is awesome. It's got a glass breaker on it. It's the perfect size. It's relatively lightweight, but it's a very heavy duty steel at the same time. And all of my EDC tools have a deep carry clip. So the Adamas sticks out just a tiny bit, but the bug out, for example, all of them are flush. Let me just show you that because I just tried to get this autofocus, okay? So it has a deep carry clip, so it's flush with the top of your pocket, so it doesn't stick out. okay? Now, all of my tools have that. The best flashlight, and this is far and away. You guys probably don't know this, but I was the first one to really float the idea and promote the idea of flat form flashlights. And after I did this, I contacted some companies and they started doing it. And I didn't get any like kickbacks or credit for that, but it's true, okay? So, and the reason why is because it just fits so much better in your pocket than a bulky round thing, right? That's what she said. Now, the reason why this thing is so cool, number one, it's super practical because, and this is the Streamlight Wedge. And I'll post links to all these things in the comment section below. It's a lightweight, okay? It has just a toggle. So it's just simple. There's no like, oh, you got to press it 4 times to unlock it and all that bullshit. None of us have times for that. When I pull the flashlight out of my pocket, I want to just flick it and it's on. Now you can just do it once, and in the position, the fixed position, it's going to emit a certain amount of light, and you can go one more, and of course the battery just died, one more for turbo, okay? So that gives you a bit more power. Powered by USB-C, deep pocket carry clip, very reliable, will never turn on your pocket just because of the way it's designed. And last but not least is this SOG Flash MT that I've been using for a while. The thing with me and multi-tools, what I've realized is that probably 95% of the time I'm going for one of 2 tools, and that is the screwdriver or the pliers. And quite frankly, I found myself looking on the internet last night for a multi-tool that was just pliers, because I don't need a knife. I don't really need a bottle opener. There's other ways to open a bottle. All I really need is a pliers, and really that's what you're getting here. You're getting a pliers, okay? You're getting a flathead screwdriver, and you're getting another Phillips screwdriver, and that's all it is. And it's relatively lightweight. It's lighter weight, I believe, than the Skele-Tool by Leatherman, and that's why I like this one. And it's a little difficult, but you can open it with one hand if you're working on stuff. So that's all great. And all of this stuff works perfectly well with this. These are the LA Police Gear pants. The only pant I wear, and we actually have the shorts version back in stock because, of course, it is summer. So go and pick up some of those things below. I promise you that maybe with the exception of the multi-tool, maybe that's the one that people are like, okay, well, I still like my Leatherman. But the flashlight, you're not going to beat it. I will argue with anybody about why this is the superior flashlight. Don't even ask me how bright it is. It's bright enough. It's a couple thousand lumens or something like that. In terms of the knives, I'll argue Benchmade every day, all day, in spite of whatever political controversies I could care less about, okay? Now, let's get back into business here. Poland building a $2.5 billion 400-kilometer stretch of trenches, mines, canals, dragon's teeth, right through 100 kilometers of nature preserve. Nothing to see here, right? No big deal. I'm sure it's nothing, as Normal C. Norman would say. Poland is also going to be buying 1,000-kilometer range JASSM-ER missiles for its F-16s. I talked briefly about the B-52 that's been circling Kaliningrad. Several countries are classing the IRGC as terrorists. So you're seeing this really odd rift happening between the United States on the issue of Israel and Russia. It seems like the EU are becoming seemingly more hardline against Russia, but less hardline against Israel. And the United States is kind of the opposite, even though they're playing the role of good cop in the Israeli relationship as well. But several countries, including Germany, are seeking to classify the Iranian Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist organization. Okay, so they're trying to ramp things up. There was a skirmish between Egyptian soldiers and Israel that quickly fell off the media radar for some reason. People are expecting that the Egyptians are going to go to war with the Israelis, and the people I talk to are basically saying that's an impossibility at this point. If anything, Egypt is going to join in the fight on the side of the Israelis. Taiwan is going to be getting better weapons than Ukraine. This is according to Michael McCall. And wasn't it just the Chinese who said that if you send another representative to Taiwan, then there's going to be trouble? Well, the Taiwanese president had just went to the United States, I believe. He was meeting with some officials in, maybe it wasn't the president, could have been their foreign minister, but he was meeting with some of these, or possibly the defense minister, some U.S. officials. And there was a picture with him in a cowboy hat and all this stuff, and they're promising them that they're going to get all these great weapons. They got kill switches for the chip manufacturing plants in case the Chinese invade, so they can't get a hold of that NVIDIA's $2.8 trillion. Can you imagine the crash when NVIDIA goes down, when the war with Taiwan starts? Nobody's talking about that. People are just living on cloud nine. I mean, can you believe that NVIDIA, after today, has a market valuation of $2.8 trillion? It's carrying the entire market when you really think about it. In terms of everything else is just melt up. It's just bloat inflated prices on stuff. And way, way too high forward PE ratio for a lot of these companies. I mean, the price to earnings ratio is just absurd. It far exceeds pre-Great Depression 1929 roaring 20s levels. I mean, it is off the charts. I think it's getting close to the tech bubble record, in fact, which was the most overvalued the market's ever been. So the fact that the entire market is riding on something that could just go up in smoke in an instant, I mean, we could just see a precipitous crash. We could see the crash, okay, the mother of all crashes. What will the Federal Reserve do then? The U.S. is now claiming that they want to forward deploy SLBM, submarine launched cruise missiles, nuclear missiles, on Virginia-class submarines. They claim that China's no first-use nuclear policy is unreliable and that forward deploying nuclear weapons at sea would provide the U.S. with options to control escalation. Now, they already have nukes in South Korea. They probably have nuclear submarines all throughout the Pacific Ocean near that theater anyways, so does this even matter? Belarus has scrapped the Conventional Armed Forces Treaty, just like pretty much everybody else. That was the conventional forces, meaning that limited the buildup of the amount of military you could have in the intermarium countries, and so now what we're going to see is a mass militarization across the board. Hedge funds are selling U.S. stocks at the fastest rate for many, many years. What I'm seeing here, the fastest rate, at least according to this graph, pre-2015. What do they know that everybody else doesn't? And Canada and the U.S. are making their first co-investment in critical minerals in a long time. It's the American military funding them for what's believed to be the first time in a 74-year history of the U.S. DPA, which created new powers for the president to fund or buy certain products as a national security matter. Now, you could probably do a whole video deep dive on this. Why is the United States ramping up production of Canadian minerals, and why is it being treated as a national security matter? It's a historic move by the U.S. government, said Ben Steinberg, who worked on energy security issues for the U.S. government, who now works for the Coalition of Battery Makers. The U.S. DoD says its investments align with its national defense industrial strategy and show a shared commitment to strengthening North American material supply chains. So they're getting ready for Russia and China to put the veil of the Iron Curtain in between us and them, or we're going to initiate that process by the looks of things. Fortune Minerals set to receive $7.5 million from Canada and $6.4 million from the U.S. and the United States. Says the company is grateful for the funding because it's difficult to attract investments for critical minerals in the capital markets, in traditional capital markets. So while this is going to be devastating for the little guy for some period of time, there is going to be opportunities when things depolarize, but it's going to take a long time to bring this stuff back online. When you think about how long it takes the United States to fix a bridge or anywhere around where I live to fix a pothole in the road, it's going to take forever. If you are one of our American customers at Canadian Preparedness, you guys know we ship probably half of our orders go to the United States. I would encourage you to get that in quick because there might be a border services strike. Now, they are considered an essential service, so legally, I don't think they can strike, but what they can do is, just make dally, and they can do their own version of, I guess, how would you say, basically they're just not going to do the job as they're supposed to. Okay, and what are you going to do? Fire them? Well, yeah. So they're concerned that there's going to be not a strike, but a slowdown in border services, which of course could, if there is packages that get intercepted, which is rare. I think it's probably about 1 in 100 that get, looked at by customs, and then it might take a week or so. It might just be, there might be delays is what I'm saying. So I'd encourage you to do that before that strike goes into effect, which I believe is coming in early June. I talked about NATO training to nuke Russia. Putin's palace in the Krasnodar region was attacked with drones. Talk about the Iranian situation, and I think that's about it. I got to get going because I got to build dirt roads. I got to build a gun range. I got to build a greenhouse. I got to build a solar system. I got to build an orchard. I got to cut some grass. I got to, oh man, what don't I have to do? Time is of the essence, my friends, so use your time wisely. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Canadian Prepper out. And by the way, go and check out my videos with Dr. Timogen Tan, a wealth of knowledge, and I would encourage people to go and support this guy. It's very important that when we get people in this community with those distinguished credentials, medical doctor, former ex-military, young savant of a person, survival expert, did 60 days on the show alone. You gotta support people like that, okay? So go and subscribe to his YouTube channel and check out some of the videos that we've done. I'll forget to post them in the description section below, but it was the video I released yesterday. That was but one of a series of videos that we're releasing, and a wealth of information, life-saving stuff, okay? All right, folks, take care. See you on the flip side.